Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Karl Siebrecht. I'm the CEO of Flexe. Super happy that you're joining us here today for the next hour for this webinar. We are going to talk about 2020 as a foundation for framing some ideas, some thoughts, and hopefully some specific things folks can go do to position themselves for the coming year and more broadly the future of logistics. So I would like to start by welcoming our two panelists here, starting first with Harshad Kanvinde. Harshad is the global supply chain practice leader for Slalom Consulting. His background includes several years at Amazon, and more recently with Slalom has worked with many customers across supply chain issues and business strategy issues from CPG, aerospace, and automotive and technology. Harshad, welcome.
Thanks, Karl. Pleasure to be here.
And next up, we have Dr. Yossi Sheffi. Yossi is the director of the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. Yossi is also the founder of at least 5 technology companies, mostly related to supply chain, that have all had successful exits, so he's quite an entrepreneur. And he's also the author of several books, including one very recently, which is very much on topic, called The New Abnormal, all about reshaping business and supply chain strategy based on some of the learnings the company's experienced with COVID. Yossi, welcome. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for promoting the book.
You got it. So I'll frame the conversation here very briefly, and then we will get right into it. So we've divided the content here in 3 sections. First, we're going to spend a few minutes on 2020, sort of highlighting some of the dynamics, particularly in supply chain and logistics, that unfolded. We could obviously spend hours and hours on this topic. We are going to aim to spend about 15 minutes on that. Again, to set a foundation to which we will add in the second section some insights based on some consumer research and some research we've done with retailers about consumer demands. How have they been shaped? How have they been amplified, in some cases changed, in part or largely in part due to COVID? So that's section 2. That will be the second part of our foundation to then tackle the real meat of the issue, which is, so what does all this mean for us going forward? We will try and handle this at a very pragmatic level, and then we may end on more of a sort of high-level sort of framework type of thought. So with that, I'm going to kick us off. So we've given a name to 2020, the domino effect. So what do we mean by that? So as the pandemic started to unfold very early this year, one way to think about what happened in supply chain and describe what many companies and consumers have experienced is sort of a domino effect. It started largely in China with disruptions to production, and that cascaded through supply chains, certainly in retail, but also obviously in the medical supply sector, still continuing in terms of the vaccine distribution. But there was a cascading effect through brick and mortar retail disruptions, certainly through e-commerce retail disruptions, and it had massive impact. So Yossi has written a lot about this, has done tons of research. So Yossi, we'll start with you. What did you see happen to supply chains as the pandemic started to unfold?
Well, several things happened. First of all, expectations of consumers changed. Level of service deteriorated. People were happy just to get something, whether it's what they asked for or something close to it. The beginning stuff from, as you mentioned, the domino effect, stuff from China was absent, then it was less. Supply chain are still under pressure due to problems in transportation. Started with problems with air transportation when we lost the belly cargo. And now, throughout, there were problems with maritime. We see now significant problems in maritime with significant delays in port, which in turn lead to lack of containers in the right place. All of these are pressing supply chain. Now, what we are seeing now is what I call the negative bullwhip. We started with not having enough, demand going down because of closures, because of what happened in China and Europe, in the United States. Companies were retrenching, not investing very much, trying to conserve cash. And then the wave is coming back. It's coming back in terms of higher demand, in terms of much more requirements for transportation capacity, and the industry cannot fulfill it right now. So we have deterioration of level of service, deterioration, people don't get what they want, and it will take a while to equilibrate. It will take a while for things to come back and demand to stabilize. So let me stop here.
Yeah. Harshad, some companies did well. Some sectors of the economy or even sections of supply chains did well. What did you see in terms of some of the areas that were able to thrive?
Yeah, I think the shortest way to answer that question, the businesses that did well throughout the different stages of pandemic, right? So the initial stage, there were supply issues and everyone was kind of taken by surprise. Then the demand issues and demand fluctuations and so on. But overall, across the industries, as simple as the companies that got business 101 right and were well-run companies did well, and the others didn't. And some examples being, so take CPG as a sector. So obviously, the demand side, there were no issues, right? So I mean, toilet paper is well advertised, but beyond toilet paper, I think daily household needs, there were some consumer behavior shifts happening. As Yossi mentioned, the variety of products that people were used to buying at grocery stores, people were okay with less variety being available. So those kind of shift happened. And companies like Unilever, P&G, and SAT, and so on, I think the companies in CPG sector which were able to take advantage of that growing demand were the ones who had their eyes open even before pandemic, had programs in place. They understood their customers and consumers really, really well. And companies like the names that I took, right? So they all had global operations. So even before the lockdowns and the broad media hype around coronavirus started, as early as December or late November, these companies were preparing because they had operations in China and they knew what's going on, and they had estimates that it's going to hit ultimately in our market. Preparation to the extent that how you should run manufacturing plants and how you should think about worker safety and staggering the shifts and so on, so that the operations don't get interrupted. Those kind of preparations were already underway. Another category, I mean, you know this, we all know this really well. E-commerce kind of shot off, right? So during the pandemic, for obvious reasons, people didn't want to go to the stores and buy the daily need items. They relied on e-commerce. So companies like Instacart and DoorDash, so the food delivery companies did really well as the usual suspects, Amazons and Targets and Walmarts did really well. But again, the same common theme applies there as well. Companies who were already well-run companies and had the right kind of digital foundation, right kind of foundation for understanding their customers and where things are moving. They were in a position to capture the upside if there was any of the pandemic and the upheaval.
Right.
I want to add something. Let me add something to this in terms of companies that did well. Just like we saw who was mostly affected in terms of people. People who were weak, had comorbidity, people who had problem suffered the most. Similarly, if you look at the department stores. Department stores 99 had a total revenue in today's dollar for about $30 billion. Before the pandemic, they were already 11 or 12 billion. Now they are 7, 8. J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, Lord & Taylor, J.C. Penney, Pier 1 Import, they are all going down. It's just like people who were sick before, went down significantly. One thing I would like to add, however, that its supply chain by and large perform well. I mean, people talk about the breakdown, or the media loves to talk about the breakdown of supply chain. You should not look beyond anything but food. You know, that unbelievable change that happened in food consumption in terms of from one day to the next, no restaurants, no universities, no industrial park, everything going to the home. Well, as people in supply chain know, it requires different packaging. It requires different signage on the package. It requires, tell me the calories and the, fiber content and whatever. Well, we don't do it when we set it to restaurants. So, and at the same time, also the type of food that people bought, a lot less fresh, a lot more custom food, comfort food, a lot more bread and pasta. Yet, yeah, here and there you couldn't buy the cut of meat that you wanted. Here and there you couldn't buy the flavor of granola that you wanted. But by and large, it worked. I mean, it worked. So only understanding the magnitude of the challenge, one can understand how well supply chain manager did during the pandemic.
Right. That's a great point. That's a great point. And we'll plant the seed and come back to it around something that both of you mentioned, which was the companies that did well were high performing, well managed companies. So we'll save that, set it aside for now. But I want to come back to getting your thoughts on, okay, so what does that mean? What does it look like to be a well-run company? But we'll come back to that. Harshad, you mentioned e-commerce in particular in terms of one of the dynamics that was very poignant in e-commerce. And of course, everybody pretty much understands this if you work anywhere near retail or logistics. E-commerce prior to the pandemic was about 15%, 16% of US retail sales. Somewhere around 7 years of market share gain happened in the span of about 3 months. And these are sources from the investment banks who do a lot of research here, McKinsey and Company. Again, the numbers may vary by a point or two here or there, but a absolutely massive shift in consumer behavior. And similarly, a significant shift in brick and mortar retail. Again, of course, not surprisingly. And Yossi, to your point, there had been a lot of retail store closures leading up to this, but this really exacerbated things. So let me ask a similar question to the one before, but specific to e-commerce. We'll start with you, Harshad. So within e-commerce, who were the companies, or what were the types of companies that were able to sort of respond to this massive spike in consumer demand and do well?
I think the first category of companies that come to mind is the food delivery, because that was, I mean, if I remember going back to March and April kind of time frame, like everyone else, and we were worried about, hey, are we going to have enough food? Probably Yossi never had that doubt, but I did. People are running away with toilet paper, and people are running away with meat and all those things. So food was top of mind, right? So if you go back to the basic necessities, how can we have, and so food delivery companies obviously kind of jumped in. And to Yossi's point, I think many people did really well. So there was absolutely surge in demand. Companies like Instacart, DoorDash grabbed onto that. But again, point to highlight there is that that didn't happen automatically. Just because there was demand, not everyone was able to execute well. Even the likes of Amazon, if you remember March, April timeframe, the 2-day shipping kind of gone out of the window. Many deliveries were delayed. But let's take Amazon as an example. I think to their credit, what they did really well is providing that enough transparency to the customer. That, yeah, the deliveries are going to be delayed, but we are letting you know beforehand, rather than you finding out and worrying about where is my stuff. So the good companies, there is that other common denominator there. Customer obsession. Customer obsession is often an absolute thing, not a relative thing. So taking that seriously, then executing really well. One example is, again, going back to March, April, finding pickup spots and finding buy online, pick in store, but not having enough parking spots available, the slots available. That was a real problem. I mean, you're buying groceries from Whole Foods, and for days, I think you're not getting slots, and You have to find that midnight time to in hopes to get the slot reserved. Companies like Amazon, Instacart, even to some extent Fred Meyer and other grocers, they took care of those challenges in coming months. So those challenges didn't stay at that level. So Instacart, I believe, I think hundreds of thousands of new couriers they added during that time frame. Amazon, the same thing. So if you look at the employment created by these companies and active hiring, very aggressive hiring, that goes toward that. How can we execute really well? This is a new world. The demand is surging. E-commerce is taking more precedence than the other channels. So that was obvious to everyone, but not everyone was able to cater to that demand. I'll just give one more example, and without naming the name because it's on the negative side. This company, when we are talking about the e-commerce, it's surging, and you have to close down the physical stores because of the initial lockdown orders. Their initial reaction was, we can't handle this growing demand. Let's curtail. Let's implement solutions so that customers can't order. That's the wrong way to look at things. That's the wrong way to look at. So we have examples of an Instacart and Amazon and other companies doing really well and executing really well, being transparent throughout that process with the customer. And there are other examples where people were worried because of the increasing demand. So, so I think I would say that I'll conclude my answer there. I think let's see what Yossi has to say.
Yossi, I'd like to get your views as well. I know you've interviewed a lot of executives and have seen a lot. Before we do, though, I want to just for the audience highlight, we do have a Q&A button here, and we'd very much welcome your questions. We'd love to make this interactive. So if you have any along the way, please send them in, and we will get to those as well. But Yossi, turning to you now, specific to e-commerce, what did you see?
Well, when we say e-commerce, I mean all the variation of e-commerce. Really call it omni-channel, because there are companies that had some tech before. Take, for example, Domino. Domino had started develop actually before the pandemic an app that allow people to order, to tell people that they are, to send a message to the store. When the GPS figured they are close to the store, somebody would come, put pizza in your trunk. They had the prototype of this, but immediately they understood what's going on and they implemented in hundreds of stores. Now, Domino in Q3 was up 17.5% over last year. And many other companies, California Pizza Kitchen and many others went out of business. So this is an example of somebody, they were prepared, technologically prepared. And technologically prepared mean not only having the app, but having the right people who can develop it very quickly, have the right relationship with vendors who can do it quickly. People, and that's, again, let me go a little beyond the omni-channel idea, because there are, of course, let me add up with this. Companies like Sephora, for example, realize people are not going to come to the store, but they need to know how to put their makeup on, women and men, whatever. So they quickly develop basically an app that you could get in and get video of showing you how to put all kind of stuff, actually interactive one. IKEA developed an augmented reality app that you can look at the stuff in the store and put it in your room and see what's going to look like. But they didn't have it before the pandemic, but they were very quickly, which means they have the resources, they have the vendor relationship, they have the internal capability to develop. So a lot of it is in the preparation. Of course, in general, people had time to prepare. People who, as Harshad mentioned, people who had the intelligence, operation in China and could see what's coming. People who have one more thing, good relationship with vendors and even with competitors. In the book, I was interviewing the CEO of CNS Wholesale Grocers. Suddenly, demand went to the roof, and they needed thousands of people. They could call. They were able to call malls and other people they have relationship with and get thousands of workers immediately added to their roles. So having this relationship with vendors, with suppliers, even with competitors, is very important to be able to switch immediately and go online. But there's also something in, necessity is the mother of invention. In the book, I have a little story about a family company that were just in Chelsea, north of Boston, that just they are now called New England Country Market. They have the different name, husband and wife team. And they were doing delivery to restaurants. Well, from one day to the next, the business went to zero. So the wife, who was also working part-time, went to part-time and they decided to develop a delivery directly to consumer. Now we're talking about, I love it because I was one of their consumers. Just happened to be because a neighbor recommended them. But to begin with, there's nothing, no website. You had to call them and they tell you what's available today. Then they develop a website which is like a PDF. You still had to call them because they couldn't get credit card online. Then they develop a real ordering website. Then they develop the ability to take cards online. Then they develop the ability for tracking and tracing. In 3 weeks, they did the whole thing. Just the husband and wife team. So to me, it's how desperate are you and how you get into it. Of course, small company is not a big conglomerate, but to me, it shows the tenacity of people who would try hard and actually make it.
Right. That's a great story. Okay, so in adding to our foundation of sort of what happened in 2020, we want to also shed a little bit of light and have a little bit of a discussion around consumers' expectations. Harshad, you'd mentioned, I think, a great example of, when things got bad, consumers' expectations eased. There was a lot of worry, can I get anything? And yes. The example of Amazon, who did a really particularly good job saying, hey, our 2-day promise, it may not hold, but the good news is we'll get it to you as fast as we can and reset those consumer expectations. So we've done a little bit of research surveying consumers and surveying retailers and asking sort of the similar questions. And starting with the consumer side, it's sort of, how do you plan on continuing to spend as much on e-commerce? What do you think about buy online, pick up in store? A lot of things. So we've pulled out just a few elements from the research to highlight, a macro point, which is there is still a lot of uncertainty. But one thing that is very clear that resonated through the research, both on the consumer side and the retailer side, is that e-commerce, this uptick we've seen in e-commerce is not going to go reset back down to, if it was 16% before, it's not going to go back to 17%. Like we've gone up to 23 or whatever, and it's going to continue to go up. In fact, 80% of retailers we surveyed said, yep, next 12 months, e-commerce is going to continue to grow. And then 2/3 of them said they expected it to grow at 20% or greater, which again, on average is higher than what it was growing before COVID. And again, the complementary side of this, from what we heard from consumers, is very much the same. Like, yes, hey, I'm sure everyone has anecdotes, personal or from family or friends. I know for me, it's my parents. They're like, wow, who knew you could get groceries to your house? This is actually pretty good. I kind of like this. So a lot of the consumer behaviors have been sort of permanently changed. So that's in terms of shopping broadly. Also, as you drill down into some of these needs, they seem to be changing and sort of getting stronger. Consumers' demands are becoming more demanding in a sense as their behaviors have changed. Early on in the pandemic, hey, if it doesn't come in 2 days, that's okay. That no longer is the case, is what we found from our research. We're now back to demanding things fast, demanding that shipping is free, demanding lots of choice in how I interact with my retailer. So the consumer is once again, or maybe even more so, in charge of what they want and what they're demanding. And just to tee up this second section here, I wanted to share a little bit more research, and then would love to get your folks, Yossi, your and Harshad's views again. We asked a number of questions about free shipping and fast shipping, and learn some things. One is consumers on the consumer side, when they're shopping and they're in the checkout process, 93% report that if they're not happy with the shipping rate that's shown, they will go search somewhere else. 93%. 85% similarly in the checkout process, if they're not happy with the delivery promise, they will go search somewhere else. And then when you ask merchants within retail organizations, what do they see, or based on their research, if they've done any, what are the top reasons for shopping cart abandonment? Number one is, hey, somebody found it for a cheaper price somewhere else. But number two is the delivery promise was too slow. And then the other data point, which I feel like is very powerful, of course, is Amazon continues to sort of understand that faster shipping is driving upticks in sales. 58% of our consumers that we surveyed who are Prime Now, that same day delivery, Prime Now customers report that they have increased how much they spend on Amazon because of this faster delivery promise. So free, fast. So Yossi, here's my first question for you. What's more important, free or fast?
The answer is yes. both free and fast are important. You need to have both in order to be competitive, as Amazon is proving every day. You need to find a way to do both in order not to lose the customer after you spend all the money, they got into your website, they click on something that they like, and now they're going to go away. This should be a sinking feeling for every retailer.
Right. Harshad, is it economically viable? I mean, is free and fast, is that sustainable? Does it work?
Yeah, I think so. And if I may, I think if I take a step back, and Jeff Bezos says that all the time, but looking at the constants of retail, right? So convenience, selection, and price. Those three things are constant. People are always going to ask for more selection, better price, and better convenience. Now you can define that convenience in this particular case as faster and faster shipping. I think the way I think about fulfillment strategy, or how do you think about fulfillment, is that fits squarely under that convenience bucket. So how can I continue to push the envelope on convenience, or simplistically speaking, faster shipping, without going broke, right? So it's as simple as that. So keep giving 2-day and 1-day and same day and so on. But the counter to that is you cannot do that economically viably if you apply that blanketly to everything that you do. So laundry basket might not be needed to be delivered in 1 day, whereas some other items might be needed. So again, goes back to the initial point that I was making earlier, that how well do you know your business and how well do you know your customers? It comes down to that. So the more granular definition and more granular understanding of what your different segments of the customers and consumers you serve need, and what your capabilities are, unless you are able to match that. So if you imagine, if you don't have any e-commerce now, or you are in the business of delivering countertops or some kind of construction material, probably you don't need the same day. Maybe you do, but in certain markets, but really understanding that well enough so that you can orchestrate that interplay between price and convenience and selection to some extent. That's the key, right? So unless you do that, it's never going to be economically viable. And if you understand your business and micro segments or different supply chains that you need to operate really well, it's always going to be economically viable. One additional point is that fulfillment and making free shipping or making fast shipping economically viable, it's not the sole responsibility of supply chain. Demand shaping and setting the right consumer expectations and marketing and commercial side, they have to work well with supply chain functions to make this whole enterprise economically viable. Otherwise, you're always chasing some false goals and then worrying about, hey, how can I not make profit on every single transaction? Because no one makes profit on every single transactions. I think it's an interplay between all those three pillars of selection, price, and convenience.
Right. Let me, for the fun of it, offer a little bit different view on this, because I think one of the critical things that you say and why Amazon is so successful is consumers say that delivery increases how much they spend. Let me start with a story that I went with a friend who was a a retailer in Israel to visit LL Bean. And LL Bean at the time was giving free return, just come to the store. And my friend asked, how can you live with 18% return? And the store manager said, my job is to increase it to 25%. What? He said, everybody who comes to the store buys stuff that they didn't think they're going to buy ahead of time. That's the issue with that's the issue that was mentioned here. When you come to Amazon to buy something that you want in a day, and you see the laundry basket that can also be delivered at the same time, you may buy the laundry basket rather than go somewhere else. So the problem of competing with such a behemoth that has the scale, that has the choice, that has the level of service is just hard. So I have a more, maybe less rosy picture, less rosy idea. And one of the way that the retailers were successful, as done by Amazon and Tesla and others, is to make money, first to make money elsewhere. So Amazon makes money for a long time only on the cloud. And or you can create a belief in the stock market that you are just unstoppable and going to the moon just like Tesla. So these are people who worked with losses and negative profit for decades, for years and decades, but then because they were able to convince the market and move the business. So part of it is, doing something something like this. Otherwise, it's building the infrastructure for agility and flexibility. And it can be done. Some of it is what Harshad was saying in terms of understanding your customer, and it's particularly good for shops that sell one type of, if you need the, I don't know, faucets for your bathroom, you go usually to a specialty shop and get the stuff, or the countertop or something, you get to specialty shop. That's different. They have a specific customer in mind. But they usually, when you want, your granite counter, you don't compete with Amazon. Right. It's the people who compete with Amazon, which is most retailers. They compete with Amazon, and competing with Amazon is tough. So if you cannot, you have to find a way to create infrastructure for flexibility. A lot of it is technology infrastructure. A lot of it is collaboration and working with others. A lot of it is culture, being able to move quickly. We can talk later about some examples.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think so. The laundry basket and so I'm buying a toothpaste. Laundry basket is available for one day. Perfectly makes sense. I think the point that I wanted to make is that continuous improvement in convenience or fulfillment convenience is the key. You may not get there tomorrow, but understanding your particular context of what kind of business you're running, what your customers want, you're trying to find degrees of freedom, right? So you may not need to invest all the things into one thing. You might have some leeway. You might have some room to get there, and it's not 1 or 0 or black and white kind of thing. I'll give you an example. So, for example, big fan of Costco. We buy a lot of things from Costco, and it's nowhere near. I wish that it's one day or the same day delivery. Sometimes it happens, but all those things as a consumer, I'm willing to ignore because of the great price and great quality and the trust that I have built in the brand. So there are multiple things in the play here, and unless you look at all those dimensions and have that continuous improvement kind of motion, and I completely agree with Yossi that flexibility and agility need to be purposeful, and you need to build that foundation. It doesn't happen just because you start screaming on your staff tomorrow. Yes. It doesn't come. Right? You need to be thoughtful about it over the years and how you think about your business.
But a lot of it is in changing the nature of your business. Think about a store like Aldi in Germany competing with much larger store, but they said, in fact, we are not going to be Amazon. We're going to be very restricted offering, but it means that everything is on the shelf. First of all, everything is always on the shelf because we have 2 types of toothpaste, not 142 type of toothpaste. We have 1 or 2, that's it. And you don't like it, don't come. But the price, because of this, they compete on price. So you decide what you compete on, and you can compete on price. By the way, you can compete on price against Amazon. Amazon is not cheap. So you can compete on price, against Amazon, but you may have to give up the selection. You may give up other things. So I agree with you. Knowing your customer, or rather than reorienting your business toward a certain customer segment where your ideas can work. So,
but I 100% agree that one day and same day, and that's becoming the norm. There is no going back. It's not, I think 2 days used to be the norm, and now it's kind of everything is prime on Amazon. Everything is one day, same day in some cases. And the expectation, the bar is set high. So you cannot sell the same things that you can find on Amazon and say, hey, by the way, you're going to get it in 10 days. That's not going to work.
Right. So we're getting lots of great questions to come in, and most of them are around, okay, so the going forward types of questions. So let's pivot to that, to try to frame, what have we learned both from the pandemic and then from the changes in consumer behavior that we've witnessed in part due to the pandemic and part independent from that. And I will kick us off here with just some very summary level research. This is from McKinsey, their global institute. They did a survey of execs mid-year last year around supply chain resiliency. Yossi's written at least 2 books on the topic. 3, there we go, 3 books on the topic. So the survey, again, this is May of 2020. So everybody think back to May of 2020. The pandemic was in full swing. There had been just massive amounts of disruption. There was uncertainty. I remember, Yossi, I think we had a conversation and we talked about, what's the recovery going to look like? Is it V-shaped? Is it U-shaped? And you said it's whack-a-mole.
yeah, exactly.
I loved it's going to be up and down. And of course, we all know it's not been V-shaped, at least broadly in the economy, but it has been for some companies. Anyway, so some of the summary takeaways from this McKinsey research they did with supply chain leaders, 93% said, hey, we are planning to increase our resilience in some way, shapes, or form. And of course, they went into more detail about what those investments might look like. And then 44% at the time said they would increase resilience at the expense of at least short-term efficiency. As we think about supply chains and logistic distribution networks in particular, one of the jokes I make kind of a lot, it's not really a joke, but just take logistics. It's 8%. It's over 8% of U.S. GDP, and it's similar size in other economies. For decades, it's been managed primarily for efficiency, right? Lean inventory, very efficient interactions with suppliers and distributors. And one of the costs of that efficiency, and which I sort of, the joke part is I dub it like the world's largest cost center, has been the mentality, right? We're spending 8% of GDP on this. We better be really, really efficient. That has come at the cost of flexibility and agility in terms of how much inventory we have, in terms of our ability to react quickly and change things in a changing environment. And it certainly feels like that dynamic has been exacerbated from the pandemic. We've talked about ways to mitigate disruptions, but then there's just this ongoing uncertainty. Like, is everyone really going to demand same-day fulfillment, or is one day, or for which products, which segments are going to value fast or free shipping? So there's a lot of disruption that's happened. We can predict that there will be future disruption, but maybe even more importantly, consumer behavior is continuing to evolve. So how do we manage in the midst of all this? And Yossi, I will, before I introduce the question to you, I have to, I'm going to read a quote from your book.
Okay.
So you have a chapter titled, it's about flexibility, and you quote Charles Darwin, but it was not the right attribution. This was erroneously attributed to Charles Darwin. He says, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. And you go on to sort of talk about how some of the better companies were able to quickly adapt to the disruption, but the best among them were able to sort of evolve forward and come up with new ways, not just in response to what happened, but to sort of in a more permanent solution for going forward. Okay, so with that preamble, would love your thoughts about sort of some practical steps, and you guys have already mentioned some examples that companies can take to build in resilience into their supply chains, into their distribution logistics networks, and better manage uncertainty. Yossi, we'll start with you.
I think in terms of, there are certain things that companies do to manage any disruption. And I talk about in the book, I don't go about much, but be able to stand up quickly an emergency operations center, have thought about the priority if we don't have enough, which customer we save, who gets what, build the infrastructure required for flexibility. But in general, I would say try to find the right balance between owning asset and using somebody else's asset. So if we're talking about trucking, for example, company can own truck, they can have contracts, year, 1, 2, 3-year contracts for trucking. They can use the spot market, they can use the gig market. Now, some companies would say, we need some asset just in case we don't have, okay, you need some asset, but business is moving up and down. So you need some asset to cover a base case, but you need the relationship, you need the software, you need the tech capability to do very quickly either mini bids if you are in a contract situation, or go to the spot market very efficiently. So it's all how much you own, how much you have long-term contract for, how much you have short-term contract for any asset that you have. So trying to find out the happy place in every part of your network to be able to land on a place that will give you, be able to retreat back to your own assets if there's no other choice. But by and large, day to day, business goes up and down, and right now more than ever, you need to be able to have what they call a breathing supply chain that
Right.
can,
Breathing.
go with you, go up and down, go for a few months up and then a few months down. This is very hard to do when you own a plant, a warehouse, a truck, whatever you want. You need to have some ownership clearly, because you were never going to be a good manager of other people trucking company if you don't have some of your own truck to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But it cannot be everything. It's because then you are swallowing all the down, and you'll have a lot of empty assets or low utilization of assets. So that's kind of an overall idea that can apply in many parts of a logistic network.
That's great. And Harshad, before I pivot to you, I'm gonna ask a question that you've already answered in part, Yossi, but we had a question that says, the influx of investments into tech companies that can help optimize existing infrastructure is not keeping up with the investments plus needs of physical infrastructure, warehouses, with the growth of e-commerce. So how do you see the optimization of both tech plus infrastructure happening in the next few years? And one of the things I heard you say, Yossi, was shared assets, or tapping into, having a balance of your own owned and operated assets, your long-term position of control over assets, balanced with a spot market, or
even gig.
Yeah, even the gig economy, particularly in transportation. Yeah. Harshad, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think what Yossi said, 100% agree with that. And I think one key thing here to note is that the flex, we talked about it earlier. So flexibility is a muscle. You need to work on it, and you need to be purposeful about it. And there are two ways to think about it. So one is the structural or the infrastructure flexibility. That's one thing. So the trucks and warehouses and other assets, physical assets that you're going to need, how can you improve the degrees of freedom there? and not own everything, but maybe contract and different layers. But then equally important is the decision agility. So how are you organized internally as an organization? How the decision making happens? Are you just taking too long for making simple decisions and moving ahead? Or is there a mechanism that you have established to take some decisions, take some chances, experiment every now and then, and so on? So I think both are important. And for both, I think there is that mindset of how can I be purposeful and thoughtful to build that mechanism so that I have that flexibility. No matter, so this disruption, COVID pandemic happened today, tomorrow it might be something else. There might be digital security kind of things happening the next day, and that might cause completely different behavior. Brick and mortar and cash may become the king. Who knows, right? So uh, no matter what the nature of the disruption is, how having that confidence that I have enough vendor relationship and enough of that structural flexibility that I can play the orchestration really well to create the right kind of supply chain on the go. That's super important, and there are variety of ways to go about it. One of the big problems that we see is, I mean, call it inertia, right? So people have done supply chain in a certain way for a long time, and that includes how you are organized internally. So there is planning and there is procurement and so on and so forth, and every functional leads are worrying about their own functional metrics and so on. No one is looking at end-to-end value chain for specific product categories or specific customer segment. That's still not the prevalent way of doing things. Those kind of initiatives need to be taken up and rethought if you need that function, the structural flexibility. And then obviously the vendors such as yourself and some other players in the market, and many other on the software side as well. So that needs to happen.
I like
But
I like the phrase you used. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised and built up. And I know, Yossi, again, in your book and elsewhere, you talk about this as not just a technical issue, not just an operational issue with companies, but also a cultural one. You know, having the right mindset to take on these challenges. Uh, Anything to add on that? I know it's a big topic, but kind of
it's a big topic. It's a corporate culture, but also it's specific element. It's a specific element which leaders can cultivate. To use Harshad quote, to build the muscle. Because what you can do, for example, if companies routinely prepare multiple futures, they don't build on forecasts. They prepare multiple futures. But when I say prepare multiple futures, it's not only we're going to sell X or X plus or minus one standard deviation, is to build the whole plan, the financial plan, the HR plan for each one of these future scenario. The important thing is several. First of all, you can move quickly if one of these actually happen. But even more important than this, that you socialize the organization to stop think deterministically and start thinking that the technical term at MIT is shit can happen. You know, so, stuff can happen. And, Harshan mentioned that the next disruption may completely obviate e-commerce. Think about a cyber attack that on banks that doesn't allow credit cards to be used.
Right.
Boom, we go back to the stores. So there are a lot of different things that that can happen, and we tend to extrapolate from the now to the future. But some other cultural issues is talk about multiple drilling. Drilling also allow people to think about that something may happen. Red team, blue team type of stuff.
Right. Yep.
Given authority to the lowest level organization is the Toyota Andon Code or the Navy when people stop flight operation, or Zara that allows lower people in the organization to redesign, when they see something. All of these are cultural issues.
Yeah. Look, one of the things that I find is a striking comparison is, and this will lead into kind of our last topic here, is if you think about the front end of e-commerce, so websites and shopping carts, catalogs, that whole thing. 20 years ago, the companies that had websites mostly designed them and built them themselves. You'd either just hire developers and you would build your own website, or you would go to an agency, a technology firm who would build you a custom website. They build you whatever you want. And some websites were better than others. But a lot of them had this shared characteristic of they were relatively not flexible. They were relatively rigid. And then what happened over time is software companies started to build platform aspects of websites that could be modified and made your own. And that created a lot more flexibility. And then also over the last 20 years, think about what is completely normal, not just for great companies, but almost for every company. You build test and learn experiments into your website experience. You test different messaging, different price points, different colors, different picture angles. Everything is tested. And it's not like a project. We say, hey, this quarter, we're going to do some testing. It's baked into the platform. You're always testing and experimenting, and you're adjusting on the fly. And that is part of the muscle that you've built to optimize your consumer flow. Contrast that with supply chain or logistics networks, right? Where you decide, hey, which transportation company should I use? What contract should I renegotiate? Where should my warehouse be? It's completely different. And I think to your point about developing the muscle, Harshad, and Yossi, to use yours about a breathing supply chain, think about how it should work. You should have a platform that is not only flexible and then super efficient with a lot of owned and operated assets where they make sense as well, but also this ongoing test and learn. Because nobody knows exactly what consumers are going to value or demand next year. So we had another question, and it kind of teed up this last view. So 10 years ago, roughly, Mark Andreessen wrote this famous article in the Wall Street Journal editorial op-ed. Says software is eating the world. So that was 10 years ago. Now, we've been hearing about the digitization of logistics. Of course, out broadly outside of logistics and supply chain, there's fintech, ed tech, health tech. Is logistics tech a thing? Is this real? Is there any value we can get out of sort of thinking of it this way and pulling lessons learned from other industries? I know that's sort of a long-winded question, but I'll finalize it by highlighting what somebody asked, and they talked about this asset intensiveness of logistics. And there's a framework that I think makes a lot of sense, which is this industry is moving from an asset-first industry, trucks, warehouses, inventory, physical stuff, atoms, supported by software. There's a lot of good software that's been around for a long time, but it's asset first, supported by software, to software first, supported by assets, and particularly in logistics, shared assets. So thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll go quickly. The answer is yes, right? So digitalization of logistics, or what you mentioned, I would say customer first, and to deliver that, orchestrating among all the assets available to you, not just your own assets, but the assets of your partners. Playing that orchestration game inherently leads to the digitalization, because once you take the information out of assets and once you model it in the digital world, moving those pieces around and making the right decisions, that makes easier, or that's a necessity for that. So to close out, agility is important. As we said, the infrastructure agility is one thing, but the decision agility is also important, so that you can orchestrate better. And for that, I think this is a necessity. Software piece, or softwareization of logistics, it's happening, and it's going to continue that direction.
I will add to it that yes, we are getting there in some parts of logistic and supply chain management, and we can see this has been happening for a long time. Good forecasts reduce the need for lots of inventory. If you have standards, you can move a lot faster. The optimization reduces the cost. There are many examples, but take one example as disruption. That's what we are talking about. There's some big change in the world. There are companies now that will give you immediately what is happening, what is the tied to the bill of material, what's the impact on your business, what is the value and risk, and only then you respond. So first, the software automatically has to do something that nobody can do at the speed, at the level that people need. So the software is leading here. Then you have to, it's of course software, communication, GPS, a lot of tech is involved in this, but you automatically get, okay, I'm not going to be able to build product A, B, C, D. I'm not going to be able to serve customer 1, 2, 3, only 50%. I have to talk to them. I have to do something. I have to run and get some new suppliers. Again, some of the physical assets, some of the physical stuff have to be prepared ahead of time. So for example, one of the examples they give is Intel. Intel has 5 levels of second source or multi-source procurement. Only at level 5, they actually use 2 sources. Level 1, they just do some studies. At level 2, they take a sample. At level 3, they take, a production sample, which means that once the software alerts them that something is happening, the physical stuff and the knowledge stuff is ready to go. So software is leading in the sense that you mentioned.
Yeah. I'm going to take one question. We've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to take a question from specific to CPG. So the question is cost increases and capacity constraints from UPS and FedEx. I think everybody's well aware of what that looked like in Q4 impact e-commerce growth. For many CPGs, the margin is significantly eroded with parcel rate increases. If we were to provide 1 to 2 day shipping, how will the landscape change in shipping and delivery with these carriers or other carriers? Harshad, you mentioned this earlier. One of the types of companies that have thrived in this is the sort of gig economy, last mile service delivery companies. And what we've seen with customers on this is, it turns out that their networks, albeit relatively early in their maturation cycle, are built for fast delivery, whereas FedEx and UPS are phenomenal, great companies. They have built and optimized a network for 2 day, 1 day, 3 to 5 day delivery, and they're fantastic at that.
And for efficiency.
Exactly. A gig economy work, they may deliver a fast food delivery and can put in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 e-commerce orders in that route. And the economics can actually be much better. Again, if companies like a DoorDash, Uber can get enough demand density to build good routes. So it's Harshad, any quick thoughts on that?
I think in addition to that, another point it highlights is that can you work with your commercial teams, right? So it's again, not just responsibility of supply chain to make sure you're incenting the customer to increase the order size, and then the economics change. Yeah. So it's not just that what I buy and how I buy from the physical, you're just kind of mimic it in the e-commerce. I think that's completely different business, different economic challenges. So the not just the supply chain, but the overall end-to-end flow need to be thought completely differently. And some companies do that well, and some struggle. But I think it's not going to be just supply chain providing the answers and making it profitable by magic, because the constraints that you mentioned, the UPS capacity, other things are real. And that's not going to go away in short order, right? Amazon is in a different position to build their own network and strategically do that over the last few years. But the challenges with the third-party logistics networks are going to be real.
Yeah,
we think we have to differentiate between the first mile and the last mile, because UPS and FedEx really don't do what we might call last mile delivery at scale, because a lot of the business is going to other businesses. A lot of the business, large part of the network is going from hub to hub to hub to hub. Consolidations to center. Only the last mile, yeah, they do last mile, but they do it from their consolidation centers, usually not from the store, the local place. So the gig is kind of different business. And by the way, a big question in my mind, and we see it with the new administration, will be how viable gig is going to be at minimum $15 an hour, and asking and require them to be actual employees, right, and provide them all the goodies that full-time employees get, rather than people who are driving their SUV and thinking they're going to make, they're making money on the delivery. Many of them don't.
I think that's a great point, and very fitting that we end this on another big open question that is a possible answer, because that is the theme. There's just fundamental uncertainty here. So what are the mechanisms to best manage and compete in that environment? So Harshad, Yossi, thank you both very, very much for your time and your thoughts. To all of our attendees, thanks for joining us. We look forward to hearing from you. If you have additional questions, we will work to get those answers back to you, and thoughts from our guests here offline. That's it. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you joining us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.